And good evening, everybody. Welcome in to the Nittany Lion Sports Report. It's live here on Bob Long Sports, and wow, everybody in Nittany Nation can take a sigh of relief as the Nittany Lions escape in Iowa City against the Hawkeyes of the University of Iowa with a 21-19 victory. Bob Long is here alongside me, Tyler Gehlhaus, and Eric Nash. We have the full crew back again here on the Nittany Lion Sports Report, and we expect to be joined by Joe Juliano of the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Penn State beat reporter in that particular publication, a guy that's been doing it for a long time, has seen a lot of games, and boy, he's going to be able to give us some good thoughts and some good commentary on where this game can fall and should fall in the history and the annals of Penn State football. But most importantly, the Big Ten opener is finished, and Eric Nash, the Nittany Lions, are 1-0 in conference play.
And I'll tell you what, it's a tough spot, and you look at their last 5 games against higher-ranked opponents. We're talking about Iowa, and it wasn't going to be easy, okay? And, you know, I didn't think it was going to be as difficult as it ended up being. It didn't seem like, based on the statistics, that it was that close of a game. But they got, you know, they made the big play when they had to, and you got to give them credit. I mean, you know, they're not just Barkley. There's a lot to this team. Maybe, you know what happened to our first Big Ten game last year. I mean, we have a winner here, and look what happened to Michigan when they went there early in the season last year to Iowa. I mean, I think, you know, they escaped with their life in a tough place to play, and it's good to have that one under their belt.
Yeah, you know, fair point, Eric, about when they went to Michigan last year. Certainly a different team than we saw down the stretch. That same Michigan team that blasted Penn State earlier, just like you mentioned, was a different team later in the year when they went to Iowa City and played the Hawkeyes and came up 2 points short. Tyler Gehlhaus, welcome back to the show. Tyler, with 11 minutes left in the fourth quarter, Penn State had outgained Iowa 419 yards to 134. That was one play before a 70-yard out from Akram Wadley as he snuck behind the linebacker, caught the pass from Nate Stanley, and went to the house. Up until that point, still a one-possession game, and I don't know if anybody's feeling comfortable, but Penn State was solidly in control on the offensive end, and then the script kind of flipped.
Yeah, I mean, finally, about 48 hours later, my heart rate has finally gone down, according to my Apple Watch. It was definitely a weird game. I can't say I was surprised. I kept telling my dad and brother, I said, look, this is how Iowa wins those games. I said, they make it, you'll outgain them, you'll outperform them, and they'll still find a way or try to find a way. And I have to admit, I didn't have confidence in Penn State going down to score that last touchdown. I just wasn't feeling it. It's Kinnick Stadium, tough place to play, one of the toughest places in the Big Ten, even the country to play, especially at night. Truly remarkable that they were able to do that. And in my opinion, that last drive of the game, that's a championship-type drive on the road, minute 42, 80 yards, 2 timeouts, march down the field, different receivers involved, Barkley picking up blocks, having key catches. It was orchestrated perfectly with Juwan Johnson putting the nail in the coffin as time expired.
And guys, that final drive, 12 plays, 80 yards, Trace McSorley, 7 for 11 for 68 yards in the air. He picked up the other 12 on the run, a scramble that was able to stop the clock momentarily as he gashed up the middle and into Iowa territory. One thing I'm going to broach with Joe Juliano when he comes on the show, and I want to get your opinion on. I remember last week I came on and I was a little bit critical of Trace McSorley's performance in that game against Georgia State. I thought that while he was efficient from a numbers perspective and he made some good throws, there were also some very ill-advised throws that he made, 2 of which should have been intercepted. Call me someone that'll come on the other side of the coin. I'm not just playing devil's advocate, but I disagree with some of the critics that said that Trace had an exceptionally poor game here against Iowa. I actually thought that with 48 throws, completing 31 of them, just a titch underneath 300 yards for the game, and that one and only touchdown pass, I actually thought that he made some pretty good throws. Good decisions on the RPO. Good decisions when he just tucked it and ran off tackle, and I thought by and large he did have a good game. There are two fumbles that we'll talk about, and one of which Was the arm going forward? I thought that the arm was going forward, and even though the defensive end of Iowa had his hand on the ball, I thought that McSorley still possessed it at that point enough to launch the arm forward. And then there was the other one where was the forward progress stopped? I'm okay with the no call, and very fortunate that Ryan Bates ended up with the football as he was tackled by 3 or 4 Iowa Hawkeyes. Besides all that, I think the offensive line did not do him any favors. 4 sacks. And again, 4 sacks against Christian Hackenberg. Okay, you might say, yes, the offensive line was bad, but Hackenberg holding on to it too long, inability to move. McSorley has shown the ability to get out of those situations and did plenty on the road against Iowa. I thought that McSorley's performance was better than the critics may have estimated, as opposed to my opinion last year, where I did not think he played as well as he could have against Georgia State. Let's start with you, Tyler. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you made a great point, Bob, about the offensive line. Even McSorley's interception, it was thrown to Josie Jewell at the end of the first half.
That's true.
It was, everything was 5-0 Penn State. Iowa couldn't move the ball. I mean, Penn State was just controlling the game, and his arm got hit as he threw it. He had Gesicki down pretty much wide open. It would have been a big play, and the right tackle at the time was Andrew Nelson. He's the same one that I believe he struggled in the first half, and then at halftime they put a redshirt freshman Will Fries in at right tackle. Chaz Wright was out with an injury, undisclosed injury. It's how Franklin deals with injuries, but so they definitely missed Chaz Wright. In terms of McSorley, I've heard a lot of people kind of going off what Bob said, like complaining about him not being like on his game. But to me, if you look at 2 of the games that Penn State lost last year, to Pitt and to USC, it came down to the final drive. They lost both of those games arguably because of McSorley interceptions late in the game. He could have done the same thing on Saturday night. Instead, he drove him down, scored a touchdown. So just the maturation of McSorley, I think, was on display. People have to, remember, you're a quarterback on the road, in a hostile environment. You're not going to throw 5 touchdowns, 500 yards. You're not going to be on the money. I mean, he's got teammates to lift them up, and that's what you saw with Barkley, and the receivers played very well too. And also you look around at his stats compared to other quarterbacks, like Sam Darnold isn't having that great of a year. I mean, anybody can be critical of him as well, but right now McSorley probably not playing his best ball, but he's playing well enough for the team.
I guess what I'd want to pose the question to you fellas would be very simply, how do you helm a team like that McSorley, had with almost 600 yards total offense, and you're sitting on 14 points with the one play left in the game? How is that even possible? When we dissect this, where did it go wrong, or was it just one of those things? Was it just one of those, hostile environment? The breaks were kind of beating the boys, the calls. I mean, where did it go wrong, or did it go wrong?
Well, I think getting the ball inside the 1 in 2 possessions and coming up with a field goal both times will do that to you. I think 2 missed field goals, one of which was blocked, will also do that to you. And again, we're talking field goal, would-be field goal here, but that's the issue. And I was having a conversation with some of the people that I was watching the game with at a wedding actually out in Johnstown. And one of the big takeaways was, I can't believe that we're not beating this team by more. There are 2 thoughts to that. The first of which is this is a really good Iowa team that has played, this is a program that has played teams very tough at home. And again, with a 4-year turnover in terms of players, 5-year truly, that doesn't hold as much weight with me personally as it does with some, but there is something to that. The second thing is, this is a Big Ten team. These are all high-level Division I athletes on the other side of the ball. You can't take the ball into their territory 7, 8 times before you punch it in the end zone and expect to run away with a game by 2 possessions. There's just not that many possessions in the football game to be able to come up short that many times and just blow a team out of the water. In fact, Penn State is very fortunate that its defense played well enough to keep its offense in the game. I'll say this. The offensive output was very impressive. I thought the way that the team was able to move down the field and be very methodical about it, we were asking for that, right? They had run about 53, 52 plays on average in the first 3 games, Akron, Pittsburgh, and Georgia State. Now they run over 99 plays in the game. And you turn around the Iowa Hawkeyes, who were the sixth best team in terms of time of possession in the country, versus Penn State 125, which was not an issue because they blew out the first three teams they played. But they flipped that script, and now what we almost sort of hear is, where was the big play? It's interesting. You know, it's tough to make people happy in this world. I actually really thought that the offense did a great job, and I do think that's the way Penn State needs to move the football. A lot of underneath throws, and then the big plays will make themselves apparent. You saw the safeties starting to come forward late in the game. Juwan Johnson had some good routes where he ran over the top, or some routes where he was cutting in behind on a slant. And that was where the opportunity was provided when you started running the football more often with Saquon in the beginning, and force those corners and safeties to start to take chances, leaving those corners and safeties essentially on an island. So I was very impressed with the offense. Obviously, you expect to put the ball in the end zone more, but at some point, you do give credit to the opposition, and Iowa's defense played very well.
Where the big plays were with Wadley and with Iowa down the stretch. I mean, when you really think about it, that's where the big plays were. Luckily, the biggest play was the last play. But, the big play, we got it when we needed it. When you look at this win, I mean, you get over the fact that it should have been, in the eyes of the Penn State fandom, it should have been bigger, should have been more explosive, more exciting, But maybe this was is a great type of win for this point in the season. This is something that maybe you can build on for when the games are going to get, believe it or not, tougher, or should get tougher. The opponents are going to be harder. It's not, I think it's a good win, and they didn't slip up like they did last year, and other teams have there. So, I mean, I think you have to take that as a positive, not so much a negative, but people look at the point spreads and things of that nature, and they feel like we underachieved. I didn't see that. That's just my opinion. That it was not, it's just sometimes it doesn't go quite the way you think it's going to when you look at the stats, and that was this kind of game.
Yeah, and going off what you say, Eric, a lot of people had this perception of, last year Penn State beat Iowa 41-14,
That's right.
and that game was at home, and Penn State was also rolling on all cylinders. Beaver Stadium night game, it's kind of the same thing as going to Kinnick on the road, and a lot of people from that game, including myself a little bit, I thought Penn State would win by 2 touchdowns, were under the impression that Iowa can't compete, but it's college football, and that's what makes it beautiful, because any given day, anything can happen. And I mean, we saw that this weekend with a couple top 6, top 10 teams almost going down that were in dogfights. I mean, Clemson was in a dogfight with Boston College, USC with Cal for a while, and obviously Penn State with Iowa. So, I mean, the fans definitely, including myself, thought it would be a little more of a blowout, not a blowout, but a little more solid of a win. But like you said, Eric, I mean, winning a game like that tests a team's character, and it's a championship drive, I like to call it.
The Penn State Nittany Lions improved to 4-0, and this is the Nittany Lion Sports Report live here on BLS. We do expect to hear from Joe Juliano. I have not gotten that call yet, but in the line of duty, I think you guys know how that goes for journalists. So we do hope to hear from him, but certainly understand if something did in fact come up for Joe. As we talk about this game and continue to break it down, Tyler, I want to get into a little bit about the defense and what Iowa showed this year versus last year. This was a Penn State offense that in Beaver Stadium spread out the Hawkeyes and quite simply burned them all over the field. Big plays, and Iowa took some chances, right? Essentially staying in that 4-3 zone to a large extent in that game last year and getting burned. Staying fairly true to that defensive mindset, I think the Hawkeyes did a nice job of simply playing that 4-3 zone primarily and playing a little bit softer. And then when the blitzes came, that's when obviously either a linebacker or a safety would come up and play man-to-man. But that base 4-3 was able to get a lot of pressure on McSorley, and keeping the eyes downfield, McSorley, as he does so well, was able to find guys underneath. But I thought Iowa's defense did a great job of playing bend, but not break, staying true to that 4-3 set. They went to nickel a couple times, of course, with Penn State's offensive weapons there. But I just give Kirk Ferentz a lot of credit for the defense he came out in and essentially just tinkering with the defense that they like to play there at Iowa, and keeping Penn State not from gaining yards, but of course out of the end zone, which was the key as you saw Penn State turn the ball over late in the first half. Iowa, one play all half in Penn State territory. It was a touchdown throw from Stanley, and all of a sudden the Hawkeyes lead 7-5. I mean, that's exactly the game plan you want when you have two Heisman Trophy candidates on the other side of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, that was picture perfect Kirk Ferentz Iowa football. That's what they want to do, is bend but don't break. And I think, Penn State may have been a little caught off guard with their defense. I know Steve Batterson touched on it last week. He said it's the most athletic D-line, or one of the most athletic D-lines he's seen at Iowa. And they played very well. I mean, a bunch of guys were getting their hands on balls and putting pressure on McSorley. So I think that their D-line was a tough test for the Penn State offensive line. And at the end of the day, though, the bend but don't break, they got bailed out with Penn State not being able. Well, I shouldn't say bailed out. They played good defense, and they didn't let Penn State score. They let them move the ball, but didn't let them score, and that's essentially what kept them in the game.
I mean, the only thing that I thought about is, Penn State plays those 3 home games, not against cupcakes, but teams that they're, basically going to fatten up on, and they did, and then they have to play their first road game in a hostile atmosphere like that. And I think it's a tough spot. They're not really mentally prepared for that type of thing. Now, some of the players are, but it's a tough spot. I mean, and they walked out of there with the win. With the savior, winning the game on the last play of the game, and I think it's big. I think that's a jumping off point. I'm not so sure Georgia State and games like that help them that much, and I think we talked about that a couple weeks back. But this is different. This is not Iowa. I mean, going back Iowa back when I was in school in the early to mid '80s, they were the same type of a team. Okay, going to this place was brutal. Penn State would battle for them before they were Big Ten compadres. Okay, they were fighting for a national championship. Went to Iowa and got smoked. Smoked. They probably lost by 10 points, but Iowa took care of them, and Penn State was number one. That was probably 1984. I'm going to say. Okay, you'd have to look at the record book for that. But what I'm saying is, it's a good win. You know what? Now you got another team that's coming up that is really going. They're going to be looking at this as their big Super Bowl, their big game. Okay, this is a statement game for Indiana as well, because they're trying to put their program back on the map in the big time. Am I wrong? So that's that. Even though, and we're lucky it's a home game. I'll tell you that much. I think we're very lucky that it's a home game, and we should win when I look at the spread. But I'm like, don't count Indiana out.
It's funny. Last week we talked about these 3 games that come up before the bye for Penn State: Iowa on the road, Indiana at home, and then Northwestern. The 12 o'clock. These 12 o'clock in the East start the 11 a.m. Central kickoff at Ryan Field. I really thought that Indiana had the chance to be as tough or a tougher matchup than, say, a Northwestern or even an Iowa. I don't know if I still stand by that opinion, even as we look past Iowa and just apple to apples, Northwestern and Indiana. But what I do know, and we'll talk a little bit about the Hoosiers, as we move on from the Hawkeyes, they got a very, very good quarterback, an NFL-type guy, and Richard Lago. And then Simi Cobbs is a guy who is maybe the best receiver in the Big Ten, certainly up there in terms of his ability to go up and get a ball. We saw what he's been able to do in the first few weeks of the season, and we see that he and Lago have a very good connection with one another, and he will be a difficult matchup for whomever the Nittany Lions put on him. Cobbs, whether he'll be matched up against Christian Campbell, which I may lean towards that matchup based on Campbell's size at 6'1" versus Haley, a little bit shorter. But again, I think that could go either way, and Haley has some great qualities to him as well, specifically the ability to go up. He can fight for the football. He's a good cover corner, and he can come up with an interception when you need him to. And I think that's a good segue because, Tyler, I want to get your thoughts on this secondary and specifically the 2 defensive backs for Penn State. First of all, Grant Haley. he was not matched up on easily. From what I remember, the majority of that time, that was Christian Campbell. But he did come up with a near interception that was later overturned. I was very surprised to see that call. I think Kirk Herbstreit, if I remember correctly, was as well. But Dave Katai, the rules expert, and also, by the way, if I may say, a Arena Football League official, he was right on it.
Good call, Bob.
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah.
Christian Campbell on the other side, I thought he had several very good plays. There was a play in the first half, a throw down the sideline where he got his head around and deflected the ball away. A couple good plays from Campbell. Of course, a few pass interference calls, one of which I took a little bit of exception with. I think Tyler knows which one I'm talking about. A little bit of hand checking on both sides. Receiver falls, ball drops incomplete, and a flag comes. That was a big point in the game as well. But Tyler, Christian Campbell versus Grant Haley, what did you see at the cornerback position on Saturday night?
I thought they both played above average. I think Haley should have had the interception. I thought it should have stood. Campbell, he's very rangy. He makes a lot of good play. He can make up for getting beat off the bat with his range. He had one or two nice pass breakups. The thing is that worries me about Indiana compared to Iowa is Indiana is going to throw, whereas Iowa really only took a couple shots with their receivers. So I mean, it's not. I mean, I don't know how to say this, but they'll be much more tested on Saturday against Indiana. So it's going to be a huge test for Campbell and Haley and the guys behind them, but also for the safeties, because I thought the safeties on some of the longer pass plays were out of position or slow getting to the ball. So they're going to definitely have to blanket Simi Cobbs over the top, whoever is guarding him on Saturday.
Bob Long, Eric Nash. We have Tyler Gehlhaus here as well. A big win for the Nittany Lions over the Iowa Hawkeyes, and we'll lead into this next, we'll say, more fun segment by where were all you guys watching this game from? I know we have some good stories, Tyler. I know you have one about the timing of everything going on, and I'll share mine with you as well.
Yeah, so I was watching the game in my basement with my brother, and my dad was upstairs with my mom and sister, and the TV upstairs is a little ahead of the TV in the basement. At the beginning of the game, I said, look, no screaming either way. My dad was actually going to stop the game by a couple seconds when it started, so he was equal with us. I said, nah, you don't have to do that, because then I'm going to scream, and I'll be ahead. So what happened was at the end of the game on that fourth down, Penn State took a timeout, and I was going to run up or shoot a text, say, just be quiet, don't say anything. So when about on my TV, just about as McSorley hiked it, I heard my dad scream, and the recliner chair like banged because the footrest went down. And I'm like, well, they must have scored. So next thing you know, they scored. So, I mean, it's all good because they won. I would have been worried if I didn't hear anything. So at the end of the day, they won. So that's all that really matters.
E. Nash, any good stories?
Really, my story was, it was just a thoroughly enjoyable game. I was just watching it in my living room. I had to cut a little bit of a family dinner short to get there to catch the second half.
There you go.
But so it's tough when you're watching the game on your phone at the restaurant, but I was able to pull that off. And yeah, I mean, I wasn't feeling good coming down to the end there. It just felt like one of those games where, how are we in the spot? And we got through it. And it's funny, you're talking about where we saw the game. Where I saw the game was nothing. And Bob's you should tell your story, Bob, because I guess yours was the most interesting, by far.
I suppose so.
Did you stop dancing long enough to watch the game, I guess?
Well, we'll just have to find out.
Okay.
Play the clip here. Out at Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Was here as the Nittany Lions were playing. But it was WATW. So that was my story, and I also knew a little bit earlier than maybe I should have known that the final play was going to be a touchdown. Perhaps that helped, however.
Yeah, Bob, just, the future reference, slide that phone up on the iPhone and hit the moon, and that won't be a problem for you.
There you go.
You won't ruin any surprises.
The moon on the iPhone.
Silent.
Who knew? Thank you for that, Tyler.
Yeah.
That's like...
He's a youngin' here. He's got to tell us old guys.
That's why I'm here, guys.
Yeah.
That's great.
Well, I used to tell time by looking at the moon, so I mean, so it's a whole new ball game for me. But we're sitting here, discussing the game, and did you realize that in a half hour, whatever we've been on the air so far, we haven't mentioned Barkley at all? Am I right about that?
You're right.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Did the guy not have 300 total yards? That's not even talking about kick return yards, right? I mean,
right.
He had close to 400.
That's what I mean. It's unbelievable. Certainly, maybe it was the announcers for the particular game, but I'll tell you what, though, they were pointing out the guy's balance and his drive and his strength are just unbelievable. And you told me today that he is, the odds-on favorite to win the Heisman Trophy. Is that right?
2-1 odds. He's now leading the pack. Baker Mayfield behind at 7-2. So I mean, I was watching college football final today, and they say that he's definitely ahead of the pack, and some guys even called him the heavy favorite, and they'd be shocked if he didn't win it. Of course, we're 4 games in, injuries and whatnot. I mean, knock on wood that he stays healthy, but anytime I don't know if any of us will ever see another player like Saquon Barkley in the blue and white. So whether or not he wins the Heisman, whether or not they, achieve their goals this year, you got to just enjoy every play that he's out there, because players like that do not come around very often.
358 total yards combined, kick return, as well as rushing and receiving. That is a school record. And, well, why not? I mean, that's absolutely unbelievable. Several plays, of course, you want to draw your attention to the third down and about 8, where he was receiving a screen pass from McSorley and really had no business getting the first down. Had no blocking and had 2 Iowa defenders in his way. Leaps one, gets crushed by the other, but stays on his feet and gets another 7 yards and a first down. Absolutely unbelievable. Then there's the other one in the first half where he tight ropes up the far sideline, puts his left foot in the ground, and just cuts upfield. Now, there was a thought maybe his knee had touched the ground. Tyler, you mentioned not reviewing the fumble, quote-unquote, by McSorley. They didn't review whether Barkley's knee was down on that play either. Was a little bit surprised. But just the athleticism on a play like that, whether the knee was down or not. He just does things that nobody else can do in college football, at least nobody that I have seen. And the offensive line, I don't think, had a great game. We all sort of said the same thing. Tyler, you broke down in depth some of the back and forth between the guys that were on, some injuries, etc. It didn't matter to him. He set a school record in a game where Trace McSorley was sacked 4 times and had to throw the ball away multiple times because the pressure was so great. The negative plays from Saquon Barkley were kept to a minimum. He's absolutely unbelievable. And the more you can get the ball into his hands, the better. He touched the ball 40 times. That's amazing.
Going off of what you said, Bob, as impressive as it was when the ball was in his hands for those 40-plus times, if you really watch the last drive, his pass blocking, you could argue, was even better. And I think that tells you a lot about the kid. He didn't really have – I mean, he had a couple touches on the last drive. The game winner didn't go to him. He picked up a massive block from either a linebacker or a defensive end that helped McSorley stand in the pocket a split second longer. And, I mean, it's just unbelievable. He can do it all. And he's not all about the accolades. He's team first, and he's great character. So that even makes everything that he does on the field that much more special, if you will.
I guess what I would say is, first of all, they needed every one of those yards when you think about it that he produced. And you're right, the last play of the game, he picked up the blitz, and that split second, I think, was the opening for the victory. So in a lot of ways, he was very, very instrumental on that last play even for the victory. But, that and they showed it a couple times after the game because the announcers were very impressed by, what he did even on that last play where he didn't touch the ball. So a Heisman Trophy seems it's certainly something that could possibly be there. But more importantly is the next game and moving on and going for the undefeated season. As they started saying that this year. Is that a new phrase that they just coined on the broadcast? The undefeated season. I'm doing the air quotes.
Well, they're not defeated, are they?
They're not, but I would tend to say that this may be the first. Well, this was the first close call for sure.
Yeah.
Of I'm sure many, or at least a couple. I mean, it's gonna be tough, but we'll see. But certainly, when was it? I mean, it would be nice because last year, when you think about it, they did so well, and it was certainly far from an undefeated season. So this year,
Well, right.
don't-
I mean, it was undefeated in the second half last season, and you
Right.
can feel that momentum swelling into everything that's going on right now for this team. Once again, the Nittany Lion Sports Report, Bob Long, Eric Nash, Tyler Gehlhaus. Unfortunately, we have not been able to get Joe Juliano on the line. We'll see if he can get in with us after the break. But also, we have a recruiting segment coming up, and Tyler's going to give his thoughts on the Nittany Lions in the race for Micah Parsons, as well as Owe and some other guys that are looking to join P.J. Mustafa and a great defensive line. The question, Tyler, is will there be the space? And that'll be Tyler to opine on that. And so much more here on the Nittany Lion Sports Report.
Dunphy Ford is Mayfair's neighborhood Ford store.
Nobody knows your neighborhood like Dunphy Ford.
Nearly 40 years.
Right here on Frankfurt Avenue.
Generation after generation, our neighbors continue to be our customers. We have access to the cars and trucks you want with financing you need.
Dunphy Ford is Northeast Philly's first choice for America's #1 brand. 7700 Frankfurt Avenue in Mayfair. Online at www.dunphyford.com.
Come experience the Dunphy difference. You'll be glad you did.
What does your character look like? Does it bounce back after each setback? Does it stand out by standing up? Does it make good on good intentions? Character is invisible until it's not. Only through action will the world know what it's made of, what you're made of. Find out how you can strengthen the character of your community alongside empowered veterans and families of the fallen at travismanion.org.
What's going on, folks? This is Bob Long from Bob Long Sports. We're live here at the Wells Fargo Center before each and every Philadelphia Soul home game. We record this now before Arena Bowl 30, and the Philadelphia Soul, the winningest team in Philadelphia. Bob Long Sports is your spot for live video pregame shows with Bob Long, Eric Nash, and Rob Stott. We even have the opportunity to talk with the AFL Commissioner, Scott Butera. We appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me. You do a terrific job, and God bless all of you and the folks in Philadelphia. I wish you the best of luck.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it.
Tune in before every home game for the Philadelphia Soul official pregame show on Bob Long Sports. And welcome back, everybody. This is the Nittany Lion Sports Report live on Bob Long Sports. Eric, jumping the gun as always. Really excited to talk Penn State Nittany Lion football. And now it's time to go to Tyler Gehlhaus, his first recruiting segment that we've had on the show so far. Excited to talk to him. As I mentioned before we started the show, Tyler is a guy that would always talk my ear off about recruiting, and I would hang with him about 50% of the way. This guy follows it very, very well. Not to set you with too high of an expectation, Tyler, but before we get into Penn State against Indiana, that banner back there, the pennant, we'll let Tyler do his thing as we have a lot of news on a crowded recruiting class.
We got to cue Tyler's music. We need music for
Dun,
this
dun, dun,
segment.
dun.
There it is. That'll work, okay?
We'll work on it for next
We'll
week.
get you some good music, Tyler.
So, as Bob stated, we're going to talk a little Penn State recruiting here. Penn State comes in right now with the number 3 nationally ranked class in the country with 23 total commitments. That's the key number, 23. A lot has been said about the number of people you can take, number of athletes you can take in a class. 25 seems to be the magic number. However, there are circumstances that allow teams to get above 25, such as early enrollees, gray shirting, which means the player is a part of the class, but not yet at school. They often take a grad year, and they still have 4 years eligibility at Penn State. I don't know what Franklin and the staff have in mind, but it's going to get really interesting because if there are 2 spots, there's about 5 people gunning for those 2 spots. It could all be viable targets, and we'll start off with you may have heard of him. He loves the drama. He's a Harrisburg native, Micah Parsons.
Never heard
of him. Not even on social media, huh? So
it's not like he was on game day or anything like that.
So he was committed to Penn State during his sophomore year, and then this year, ironically enough, the day after the blue-white game, he decided to decommit from Penn State. And ever since, it was said to be that he would be going to the Ohio State University. Maybe he doesn't want to play school. I don't know what his reasoning is. But he got a dog. He named his dog Brutus, same name as the Ohio State mascot. So the list goes on and on. Well, he took an official visit out to Ohio State for the Oklahoma game a couple weeks ago. Not only did Ohio State get killed, he apparently... Well, not apparently. He made some tweets about Ohio State needing to change the quarterback, which I don't disagree with, but I'll let J.T. Barrett stay in there because I think that helps other teams against Ohio State. Anyway, rumor has it that was his last straw with Ohio State. He did some other things to upset them. Whether or not this is all true, he was at Penn State the next weekend for an unofficial visit, which means that he had to pay for his way to get there and lodging, food, all of that. And not that that's a big deal, only 90 minutes from Harrisburg. But then the crystal balls, and for those that don't know what crystal balls are, what that means is it's for the recruiting terminology for where they think players are going to go. And the recruiting experts from a couple schools started pegging Penn State as the crystal ball favorite. So whatever happened with Ohio State, Nebraska was also set to be in the fold there. And they're a mess right now with firing their AD. Their coach might be gone at the end of the year. So right now it's looking like it could be Penn State for Parsons. Certainly doesn't hurt that his teammate Shaquan Anderson-Butts, an athlete but will probably play receiver, defensive back at Penn State, has committed to Penn State. And that's really all for Parsons right now. We'll have to see how the soap opera develops and ultimately ends. I know that he wants to enroll early, which means he'd be wherever he goes in January for the start of spring semester, so he will use the early signing period in December. Also, going off what Bob said, there's other talent there, especially at defensive end. Jason Owe from North Jersey is set to be down between Penn State and Ohio State, as well as another defensive end from Cleveland, Ohio, Tyreek Smith, who is also getting crystal balls to Penn State. Not to mention that Rasheed Walker, an offensive tackle, is projected to go to Penn State, and maybe even Solomon Enos, a receiver from Arizona. The name might sound familiar. Yes, he is the son of former Penn State great Curtis Enos. So the problem here is that there are possibly 4 to 5 guys, and there seems to only be 2 spots right now unless Penn State can find a way to take more. So right now it's looking a bit interesting.
How would, for those listening, how would Penn State go about creating space?
You know what? I actually don't have a definite answer for that besides the fact I know they factor in guys that might transfer due to playing time, leave early for the pros. We all know one guy that will probably leave early for the pros. And I'm sure they already have that factored in. And then guys maybe leave the program for whatever reason, quit, injuries, all that. So you can have 85 scholarship guys on the team at once. I'm sure James Franklin and the staff knows what number they can target. I know the NCAA has some loopholes in how you sign more than 25. I know Alabama does it almost every year. So it's doable. I don't think that Penn State wants to get into the habit of cutting players that they've recruited that are on scholarship. It's just really not fair to college kids at any level.
Tyler, you see that sometimes in basketball specifically because you have such few scholarships with which to work, especially when you have a program that's building. And it's funny, there's a basketball program at Penn State that's in that building scheme, and there have been a curious case of people no longer being with the program after a year or two. Now, that's not saying anything specific, but that has been brought up in Penn State circles with Pat Chambers. Penn State football does not want to go that direction, but fortunately or unfortunately, and it is fortunately, right now they're in a situation where they're recruiting guys at the freshman, high school, senior level that are more talented than some of the kids that are juniors and seniors. And unfortunately, that can put programs in a tough spot. While we talk Penn State, maybe the best possible example of that is the Penn State hockey team that went from club D1 up to true D1 hockey and went from getting guys that were truly club players and decided to come on their own merit to guys that were getting full scholarships, guys that were playing at the high junior level, and now guys like Casey Bailey that are in the NHL. So not to divert too far from where you were going, but that's kind of part of the backdrop of a program that's growing in prestige and I guess in Penn State football's case, growing back to its prestige level and getting higher quality athletes than truly they ever did, even under Joe Paterno.
Yeah, and it's a great problem to have, actually, that you might have to turn away 4-star guys that usually you had to recruit very hard to the end. It's great because they're on the national scene, and it's a good problem to have when you have more talent wanting to come play for you than you can actually take, because then, I mean, you can never have too much talent on your football team, and they're going to have, looking at this class, if all these guys stay, they're going to finish with a top 5 class more than likely. So
perfect year for this too, Tyler. PA is down. Ohio is a little bit down to some extent. The DMV region is the Maryland, Virginia, etc. Very, very strong at this point. And then also you talking about going to Arizona and getting kids from Georgia and Florida, and that's the big thing there. Eric, did you have something over there?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, what was the situation with Parsons decommitting, as I think you called it? What was the reasoning behind that? And is this guy like a bad seed? It sounds to me like, I mean, is this the kind of guy with a program with Penn State that's trying to be, do everything the right way? Is this the kind of guy you want to bring into the fold? Just from what you're telling me, naming, he's pissed off 2 schools in less than a year, right?
Right.
Why? What's the deal with that?
So he might be a bad seed. I can't, judge a 17-year-old that's the highest recruited player in the state and top 5 nationally, because I've never been in those shoes, and I don't know anybody that ever has. So it's hard to say how the fame can change some people. I know that it was kind of weird that he was at Penn State for the blue-white game, and then the next day he told Jim Franklin. I guess they had a meeting, and I don't want to make things up, but from my understanding, they said, I'm not totally sure I want to come here. Is it all right if I decommit, and will there still be a spot open for me if I want to come back into the picture? And James Franklin said, there will always be a spot for you until you tell us you're not coming here.
Okay, so he kind of decommitted, but he gave himself a back door.
Yes, and
okay.
And in terms of a bad seed, I don't think he's a bad kid. I just think he loves the attention, and you have to take. And Penn State, I think I think you have to take him if he wants to come here in the end, because he's a difference maker that can put you over the hump if on the defensive side of the ball, and maybe even offense a little bit.
What's really interesting about this as well is, now PJ Mustipher, we had the opportunity to broadcast one of his games here on BLS. We called the LaSalle College High School games in the area. And LaSalle traveled down to McDonough, just outside of Baltimore, in Owings Mill. And I got to see PJ Mustipher live and in person. And that kid is an absolute freak. 6'5", 295 pounds, very agile, great lateral movement, and great power. It's a big reason he's going to the Under Armour All-America game. Now, also in the spirit of not saying things about which we're not 100% sure, without getting into the specifics that I've heard, the PJ Mustipher issue with his brothers going to Notre Dame, that kind of fell apart. With Brian Kelly, with certain comments that were made by Kelly in the past. So Mustipher going to the Under Armour All-America game, coming to Penn State next year. Both of those offers came in August, and he accepted both of them in August. Now looking to actively recruit Jason Oweh and Micah Parsons to join him on the defensive line. Now Mustipher was also in town in Philadelphia here, playing against Malvern Prep. And actually, the day after McDonough played LaSalle in that game in Baltimore, he drove up to Penn State for the Akron game and saw and had an official visit with Penn State that weekend. So I also think Mustafa, a key cog that we didn't mention obviously in that list because he's already committed, Tyler, but Mustafa could be one of those key cogs just the way Adam Brenneman was on the offensive side of the ball back in the Bill O'Brien days.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely – Mustafa already has the size and strength, I think, to play at the college level, and that's very unusual for defensive linemen. They usually have to redshirt, and then even their redshirt freshman season, they don't play much. So it's really not till their third year on campus. But, I mean, looking at his size and his film a little bit, you saw him in person, he might be ready to – he could be a game changer in a very in my opinion, compared to the guys they're recruiting right now. He's not as nationally known, but when his career is said and done, he might end up being the best one out of all of them. So, but then again, recruiting is oftentimes it's a crapshoot. I mean, you could get a 5-star that turns out to be nothing, and you can get a 3-star that turns out to be an All-American. So you just really never know. And I do think that Penn State staff does a great job of finding and evaluating talent. For example, everyone knows that Justin Fields was committed. When he committed, he was a 3-star, and he didn't have the big offers yet. All of a sudden, he's the number 1 recruit in the country, and he decommitted. He's from Georgia, quarterback, so he wanted to view his options, and I don't expect him by any means to come to Penn State, but I think it just goes to show their ability to identify talent at a very early point and get these recruits, get in their heads and really make a relationship with them, and it pays off 9 out of 10 times in the end.
Tyler, one of the big targets for Penn State and a guy that folks in Happy Valley can be excited about if and when the time comes, Ricky Slade. Ricky Slade, your thoughts on him?
Sure. Ricky Slade is probably the top running back, in my estimation, in the country. Every site has different opinion, but I tend to think he's the best back in the country. And it's kind of funny because you look at the roster right now. Barkley was a 4-star. Behind him is Sanders, who's a 5-star. And coming in is Slade, who's also considered a 5-star. And you look at that, and no knock on those two guys, but they will, in all likelihood, not be what Barkley was. So going again with the recruiting rankings and such, everybody develops differently. But I think it's tremendous to have, assuming that Barkley leaves after this year, guys ready to go for next year. I mean, Sanders will be another year mature. Robinson's still there. You bring in Ricky Slade, who might play, might redshirt, and then you have Journey Brown, a freshman this year, who's redshirting. That's the fastest kid in the state of Pennsylvania. So, I mean, it's good to have a stable of running backs because in the Big Ten you need more than one. So, definitely pumped about Ricky Slade. He seems totally 100% bought in, and I would not expect him to waver at all for his commitment.
Eric Nash, any recruiting questions or thoughts for Tyler before we turn our attention to Indiana?
Thank you, Bob. Yeah, I do. I mean, this decommitting terminology, this is very troubling to me. Is this like a thing now? Is this a new thing? I don't know this term, okay? I mean, what is this?
You better start familiarizing yourself with it.
It seems like a new millennium type of term to me. Your word is not your bond anymore?
It's exactly what you just said, right. And a lot of it is social media. And these kids love the attention, and I can't say I disagree with them. If you're a top recruit, it's like they have a girlfriend, and then the next thing you know, somebody better looking walks by, and they're like, "Oh, I like that," and then sometimes that doesn't work out, and they go back to the school that they first liked, which might happen with Parsons. So decommitting is definitely becoming more popular. It's almost like you have to become accustomed to it, but that's something that James Franklin has done extremely well. He's lost some guys very late in the process, and then signing day or days leading up to it, he'll go out and get somebody that's committed to another school. And it's like, how did he just do that? And the guy hasn't even visited campus. So it's truly remarkable. Decommitting, it's very frustrating, but it goes both ways. You win some, you lose some. So it is becoming, Eric, it's becoming more popular. I just think kids these days have a tough time being committed to really anything. So
Ethically, it's troubling to me.
Let's get the full picture, though, can we? These schools early on in the process will lob out these verbal offers well in excess of 25 a year. Alabama will throw 100 out, right?
Okay.
Something like that, Florida State, etc. So it is on both sides of the equation. It's just the rules of the game that have been established. So I don't know if it's necessarily the kids' fault individually or a bad reflection on high school seniors. I just think it's the process. And if we need to go back to the drawing board and if the three of us want to rewrite those rules, we tell you what, I think that's another show.
So we can play your BSing type of game, basically. You know, you're kind of dangling this carrot that may not be there, and we're going to do the same.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
I mean, I guess I guess all's fair in love and football. You know,
okay,
which is fine.
That's
and
fair.
If you love football, then that's fair too.
Well, it's a good discussion here, and want to turn our attention to the phone for just a second. This may be Joe Juliano from Philadelphia Inquirer. Is this Joe?
Yes, Bob. I'm sorry, man. I'm calling late. I apologize.
No worries. Actually, you caught us in the last 10 minutes of the show here, so we're really excited to talk to you. Joe Juliano from the Philadelphia Inquirer covers the Penn State Nittany Lions football team. Joe, were you out in Iowa City this weekend for the game?
Oh, yeah. I was out there, and what a game it was. Probably they said instant classic, and I don't like throwing that word around. It seems to be thrown out a little too much, but this was pretty good.
I want to get your thoughts on, let's start with that final drive. We dissected it a little bit earlier in the show, but Trace McSorley, phenomenal down the stretch, 7 for 11, throws for 68 yards, rushes for the other 12 for the 80-yard drive down the stretch. What did you see out of him and that Nittany Lion offense down the stretch that maybe we weren't able to see earlier in the game?
Well, I think what it shows you is that, Trace McSorley is for real. I think there was some doubt as we started this season that, I don't know how people think that Trace was maybe played a little over his head last year because, he would hit these long passes, a lot of chunk plays they would get. And, he would lead these comeback. And he got the credit from outside the Penn State community for doing what he did. I mean, it was, Saquon Barkley's show, and the defense was good, and Chris Godwin was having an All-American year. But I think people were going into this year saying, all right, Trace, well, you had one good year. Let's see if you could do it again. And he's doing it. The fact that he, had the confidence and the poise and the skill to direct that drive and the brains, because, clock management is what it's all about when you're, the last 136 and 2 timeouts and you got to go 80 yards. It's, it's pretty phenomenal what he did. And, you asked about dissecting the drive. I mean, he has a lot of options to go to in that offense. And, maybe Iowa played a little soft, guarding against the deep ball. And he just cut them apart with those medium passes, 10, 15-yard passes. And that's what worked until the very end.
This is Joe Juliano from the Philadelphia Inquirer here on the Nittany Lion Sports Report. And, Joe, I want to get your thoughts as well on the offensive line. I said earlier in the show that I thought that Trace McSorley maybe played better than some of the criticism he's receiving, and I thought some of that stemmed from the offensive line, the 4 sacks he took, some of the throwaways. But at the end of the day, 31 for 48, an overturned, or I guess a call that never ended up being reviewed, the fumble, and then, of course, the interception where he had the ball knocked away at the end of the half and put it right in the hands of Josie Jewell. What was your thought on the performance at quarterback from Trace McSorley if you had to grade it?
Oh, I thought it was really good. I mean, I would probably give it about let's see. Well, the first half, I think you would agree, it really wasn't, all that sharp. He missed some easy throws, and the line wasn't really giving him the greatest protection. I think the line was kind of feeling out the Iowa defensive line to see, and they had to step up their game a little bit to make sure that Trace was protected. And Trace also threw some passes that were knocked down. This kid, Morgan, for Iowa, number 98, had a phenomenal game with, a couple sacks and some tackles for loss and a bat down, a blocked field goal. I mean, the guy played phenomenal. Jewell played phenomenal. I think once the offensive line got the protections together, there was a little better. There seemed to be a little better movement in the passing game in the second half. But for a grade, I probably put it somewhere in the B+ to B range. And obviously, it'd probably be more of a B+ when you consider what happened the last 136.
Hey, Joe, this is Tyler. I had a question for you about the atmosphere at Kinnick. I'm not sure. I'm assuming you were probably up in the box. I was wondering if you could describe to us the noise level, compared to Beaver Stadium, and just the overall atmosphere of Kinnick.
Well, we can hear it through the windows, but it's not the same as Beaver Stadium. It's funny, as they build these new press boxes, Penn State has one of the oldest press boxes in the Big Ten. Other stadiums have, refurbished or rebuilt their press boxes. They're pretty soundproof. Basically, they're pretty weatherproof. When you get those cold November days, you're not freezing up in the press box. You're pretty comfortable. And same in the summertime. I mean, we had summer-like conditions with a game time temperature of near 90 degrees in Iowa, and the air conditioning was going, and everybody was happy. So you don't really hear the noise as well as you hear at Beaver Stadium, because Beaver Stadium, they have some heat, and that's about it when it gets cold. Nothing really when it gets warm. All we have when it gets warm are the windows, and you can hear the crowd perfectly when the windows are open. So. It's hard to compare. It did seem like they were very loud at Iowa. I was a little disappointed they didn't sell out because, it's a great atmosphere, a great opponent, and for them not to sell out looked a little funny to me. But I'll still take Beaver Stadium as far as atmosphere is concerned.
Bob Long, Tyler Gehlhaus, Eric Nash here on with Joe Juliano of the Philadelphia Inquirer. Joe, the Iowa defense, I think, did a great job of bending but not breaking. With 11 minutes left in the fourth quarter, Penn State had 419 yards of total offense to Iowa's 134. Obviously, that changed with a 70-yard reception from Wadley and a 35-yard rush from Wadley. If you could describe Kinnick, maybe not sold out as it was, how everything sort of changed, and if you could break down sort of the atmosphere that stadium had over the course of those first 3+ quarters, where Penn State kind of just plodded along and took a 15-7 lead.
Well, you basically you're taking the crowd out of the game when you're moving the ball as well as Penn State did. But of course, there were opportunities to get the crowd back in the game because while Penn State was moving the ball, they really weren't scoring. The field goal kicking was not good. Asked Franklin after the game about is he concerned about the field goal kicking, and it's just a matter, he said, of just getting everybody more organized. The snapper and holder seemed to be having some issues on the blocked field goal. The right side of the offensive line was pretty thin to let Morgan come through and block it. So I think that's something that they're addressing or going to have to address this week. Once, as you mentioned, once Wadley, broke for the touchdowns, the 70-yard pass and the 35-yard run, things got really exciting in a hurry because when it was 19-15, you're thinking, boy, Penn State's really going to have to play just some fabulous ball over the last 2 minutes to win, and that's what they did.
Hey, Joe, I'm Eric Nash. Any early thoughts on the storylines for the Indiana game next weekend?
Well, the funny thing about the game is that you're going to be dealing with two of the top offenses in the Big Ten. Indiana's using a 2-quarterback rotation now, which I find hard to believe, knowing how good Richard Lago is. So we'll see how that works out for them. They have a good freshman running back, a true freshman named Ellison, who's really gave them a shot in the arm in the running game last Saturday with 186 yards. So it's going to be pretty much an offensive battle. Penn State's going to have to really play well on defense to keep them out of the end zone. Just keep them from getting into Penn State territory and scoring, whether it's field goals or touchdowns. But I see Penn State moving the ball pretty well against Indiana's defense. They're last in the Big Ten against the rush. Of course, their coach said today, Tom Allen said that a lot of their stats were skewed by the fact that they opened against Ohio State, and Ohio State put up 596 yards and 49 points against them. So But their defense has played better. But this is a step up from Virginia and Georgia Southern, and we'll see that they're going to be really tested by the Penn State offense.
Joe, a focus for us here on the show has been essentially it's a 3-game series here for Penn State leading into the bye, starting with Iowa, and then, of course, Indiana and Northwestern, where this team is going to need to essentially roll into that bye playing well and finding out really who they are offensively. I think they have a good idea of who they are offensively, but in terms of what they may have found against Iowa, maybe was not their best effort. So what do you think this team would like to see or find out in the next 2 weeks, heading into that bye week, followed by, of course, Michigan, Ohio State, and then Michigan State?
And come together a little better. I really don't have any doubt that they're together. It's just that they have to play better. That's pretty much the bottom line now. The week before against Georgia State, obviously Brendan Mann being out of the lineup and them having to do a little shuffle in the offensive line, and then this past Saturday with Andrew Nelson, who I absolutely like very much. I mean, the guy is a great kid. He's come back from injuries, sophomore year, junior year. Had to sit out the first game this year, and really pleased to see him back in the lineup. But let's face it, on Saturday night he just really was having trouble handling the pass rush from Morgan on that side of the left side of the Iowa defense, the right side of the Penn State offense. And Will Fries had to come in there and relieve Nelson at right tackle. I don't know if Andrew was hurt. Coach Franklin didn't say after the game, but they're really going to have to step it up on the line. We talked about how much better the line is this year and more experienced and deeper, but you really got to come up with, 5 guys who, can play a little better. And I understand that Chaz Wright had a ankle problem and did not play Saturday night. So we'll see if he can get back in the lineup against Indiana. But yeah, I think the offensive line has to play better. I think there were some, I remember thinking that there were some really strange looking plays in there that Coach Moorhead called, maybe clean that up this week. I'm sure they'll be self-scouting that. So that's really where they have to do it and still play the rush a little better. They were really good against the rush against Iowa, and they have to have that continue.
Joe Juliano from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Joe, we appreciate the time here tonight. Thanks for giving us a call, and we hope to talk to you soon. Enjoy the game in Beaver Stadium once again, heading back home after a true road game against Iowa.
Well, thanks for having me on. Sorry again for the late call, but I'm glad we had a chance to talk.
Oh, no problem, Joe. Thanks again. Great insight, and we'll talk to you down the road.
Good. Take care. Thank you.
All right. That's Joe Juliano from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Thanks again to him for giving us a call here tonight. And better late than never. So very nice of Joe. Like we said, in this profession, you just never know. Things come up, but glad that he can make time for us there at the end. Guys, interesting thoughts from him, and I think we will maneuver that into our keys for the game as Joe talked a little bit about the struggles for the Indiana defense against the run. We talked about Simi Cobbs and Richard Lago and their prowess against one another. Start with you, Tyler. Key to the game on Saturday, a 3:30 kickoff at Beaver Stadium.
Key to the game for Penn State is going to be getting pressure on Richard Lago, and you're not going to be able to completely stop the pass attack of Indiana because that's what they like to do. I mean, you saw what they did against Ohio State in the first game of the season. You got to slow them down and just keep them contained. Try to force them to field goals. At the end of the day, Penn State's offense should have no problem putting the points up on the board like they did on Saturday, where they had issues doing that. But this is going to be totally different. It should be more of a shootout, but I don't even see Penn State's defense giving up that many points. Penn State should win comfortably, let's say 42-21.
Eric Nash.
Yeah, I'm interested with the dual quarterback situation that Joe had pointed out. I mean, that's kind of interesting. You have Lago and also Peyton Ramsey going together. What's that all about? We really don't have the information. That's an odd thing for a Big Ten team.
Well, what you see with Ramsey, and you saw a little bit earlier in the season, he's a guy that can be a good running option out of the backfield. So Lago is a pure pro-style sling it type of guy, and I think that's a big reason why the NFL teams are looking at him. Really strong arm, pretty accurate, trusts his really skilled receivers to go up and get the ball and puts them in position to be successful. Ramsey, on the other hand, came in at times against Ohio State and was able to shift the defensive line a little bit, get the linebackers out of position, and really throw off that Ohio State defense. Remember, this Indiana team had the Buckeyes on the ropes in the first really night of football here in the college football season. Right. So it is a little bit of a concern as Penn State's defense may have opportunities or may have decisions to make from a where you apply safety help. Marcus Allen is not the world's best cover safety, and I think this game, more than just about any other game, is a game where that will be tested. Of course, he came up with his first interception of his career against Georgia State, but Marcus is going to have a test in this game, and I think that's a good thing for us to see, a good thing for the NFL scouts to see. And that's going to be my key, is the secondary and the cornerbacks. Christian Campbell one-on-one against Simi Cobbs, if that's indeed the matchup. Where will the help over the top be? And how well can Richard Lego, because we've seen him be able to do it in the past, recognize where the safety help is and where the safety help is not. And from a defensive perspective, that's my key for Penn State. It's not the D-line. Sharif Miller is an absolute stud. He continues to show that, and it looks like Penn State, unfortunately with the loss of Torrance Brown, but is moving on okay there from a defensive line perspective. It's can this team and can the secondary be successful against this really strong Indiana passing attack?
Interesting point, Bob. Richard Lego actually, as many touchdowns and as he chucks the ball around the yard, does throw a good share of interceptions.
Absolutely.
So it'll be good for Penn State to maybe get their hands on some more balls. I believe they lead the Big Ten in interceptions. I think the number is 6. But he's definitely turnover prone, so that could be another key to victory. And like you said, you're going to have your eyes on the secondary. It's a great opportunity for them to step up even more. I think they've already done a great job this year and take that next step.
I want Christian Campbell. I want to see him get a pick here at some point. I mean, that's he's played pretty well, I think, and has some NFL eyes on him. Grant Haley's come up with a lot of the big turnovers so far this year. Campbell's been really solid. Let's see Campbell get a pick or two this weekend.
How about predictions?
Okay.
Can we do predictions?
Sure.
'Cause I think we should do
Let's
predictions.
do it. You lead us off.
I'll be happy to. Well, the betting line, the opening line was 16.5 points in favor of Penn State. Interestingly enough, my research shows that 6 out of 7 games, Indiana was beat the spread, basically, as the underdogs of road games. I'm sorry, for road games.
In the last, 2 years?
In the last, 6 out of the last 7 games, whatever, the last 7 games, and that's a pretty strong statistic. This is a big game. Like I think I mentioned earlier in the show, this is it really could be a very big statement game for Indiana. All that being said, Penn State's a brutal place to go and play and make your statement. Okay, so I'm gonna say if I was betting the game, I think it's going to be between 7 and 10 points in favor of Penn State. So I would take Indiana on the bet and Penn State on the game. That's what I would say. Closer than you might think.
Yeah, I already made my prediction of 42-21. I think it's going to be high scoring. Indiana's not going to be able to stop Penn State. Penn State, you might not even see them really try to kick after their. Oh, well, I don't think they're going to do anything like Doug Peterson did with the Eagles, 4th and 8. But I think that you're going to see them really emphasize red zone offense, which I think will lead to 6 touchdowns. And also something interesting to watch for that we haven't talked about at all yet is the uniforms that Penn State will be wearing on Saturday. A little bit of a throwback theme, different parts of the uniform for different years of Penn State football, numbers on the helmets, gray face mask. It'll be a different look for Penn State. Penn State fans aren't used to that, but should be cool to see.
I've been of the opinion that they should go back to the numbers on the helmets for a long, long time, just about as long as I've been a Penn State fan. Always been a fan of numbers on helmets. I think it looks great in Alabama, and I think it looked great in Penn State history. Anybody want to hop on that train with me or no?
We'll have
it's
to
okay
wait and
if
see.
not.
No, we'll have to wait and see how it looks. I think that if we went helmets, we would look. If we went numbers on the helmets, we'd look a little too similar to Alabama because the uniforms are both very historic and plain, and I love the tradition behind the uniforms. But I think this bad boy right here looks pretty good too. So I mean, we'll see how it looks Saturday. Maybe a once a year type thing's pretty cool too.
As my eyesight is beginning to fail, I would have to say I'm all with you, Bob. I'm on board with you. I don't think we got your prediction, did we?
We did not. We did not. My prediction is that they do not go back to the numbers, and it's a travesty. But last year, Penn State goes to Bloomington, Indiana, and they win the game by 14 points. But they trailed in the fourth quarter, and they were the beneficiary of 5 turnovers by Indiana. Of course, the defense was very good in the way that they were able to cause those, and anticipatory in some of those interceptions and fumbles that they were able to recover. All that said, I think this Indiana team can score really well. Eric, I don't quite put as much credence in that statistic, although they do have some of their key guys back. What they don't have is Kevin Wilson, the head coach. I think Tom Allen's doing a great job, but Kevin Wilson brought some swagger to that program. Allen's trying to continue it. I think it's going to be right around that line. Give me a 14 to 17 point win for Penn State, somewhere in the 34 to 20 or 34 to 24. We'll say 34 to 20. I'll go with that. So fairly high scoring, but I think what you're going to see is Indiana, even when they throw the ball, they complete a lot of passes. They'll keep that in bounds. That clock will run. Penn State, I think, is going to run all over Indiana, and that clock will run. So maybe a few less plays than we've seen holistically in the last few games. Some longer drives, but I think Penn State is a winner by 2 touchdowns. That's my thought. Any other last thoughts, boys, before we get out of here? Thanks again to Joe Juliano for coming on, even though it was a little bit late, and that's pushed just past the 9 o'clock hour. But as I said last week, no show coming into the studio after us, so we can continue on.
It's a nice feeling.
It is.
Thanks for having me, Bob. Good time. Go Penn State, 5-0.
Yeah, I mean, I just hope that this weekend is a little more relaxing. But at the same time, I hope that they continue to improve because, like Eric said, I think that there was a lot to take from that game, and there is a lot of improvement. Even though it was a close game, a win is a win in an environment like Iowa. We get home. Can't wait to see the new uniforms, and I think that they have a lot to prove after Iowa. I think some people are probably doubting them, and this team does very well when people doubt them. So we shall see.
Good point. Good point.
For Eric Nash, for Tyler Gehlhaus, I'm Bob Long saying so long from Philadelphia. And this is the Nittany Lion Sports Report. It's weekly here on BLS. The matchup this weekend, the Indiana Hoosiers against the Penn State Nittany Lions, 3:30 p.m. at Beaver Stadium. Everybody take one last breath. Iowa is done. The win is in the books, and no need to sweat it out any longer. The Hoosiers come to town on Saturday, and I hope everybody enjoys themselves that's heading up to the game or wherever you may be watching. We'll see you next week as we break down the Indiana game and preview Northwestern, their last game before the bye. Take care, everyone.